Hi guys, Brain here, and welcome to a different kind of video today. Lately on the stream, we've been having a lot of conversations about maps and different map strengths because a lot of content creators have put out their own map tier list, especially since we got a new, very, very ugly and very not gameplay friendly map coming out soon, and I'm going to tell you where that'll go at the end of this. But yeah, we've been having a lot of discourse in my Twitch streams talking about what map is good and what map is not. So I'm going to give you my own take what I feel like the maps are in terms of a map tier list. For Dead by Daylight, what is the most killer sided? What is the most survivor sided? What's kind of in the middle? So I want to break down very quickly what kind of maps the map categories are that I'm going to be talking about, and also how I feel about them. First off, I want to say that this is going to be mostly subjective. I want to make it mostly, I like as objective as I can make it. But this is mostly how I feel when I go to these maps, or my experience in my 4.4, almost 4.5k hours. I am racking those up. In this game, how I feel going to each of these maps, and how my experiences over the years has been on each of these maps. So there's going to be a subjective side to this, so if things are different from your favorite content creator, I am not doing the major in-depth research into all of this, or the major in-depth research into all of these that, you know, I cannot see anything in these that a lot of other people have done. So it's going to be a mixture of the objectivity and subjectivity. So yeah. So first off, I want to say it's going to go from definitely killer-sided, mostly killer-sided, to balanced or bad for both sides. That's probably the only one that's kind of weird for you, is because maps can be balanced in a fun way, which means that, like, for the most part, nobody really has an advantage. But sometimes maps can be quote-unquote balanced in the fact that both sides are having a terrible time. And I bet a few maps already popped into your head, which will probably fit in there. And then mostly survivor-sided, and then definitely survivor-sided. So let's go ahead and get started, because this is going to be a long video. Okay, in terms of the most killer-sided map in the game, it is definitely, for me, going to be Midwich, or as I like to call it, I'm going to censor it anyway, Midwich, in my streams. Midwich is aesthetically my favorite map in the game. I think it is beautiful. I also love Silent Hill a lot, so it's kind of like a bias thing as well, but I feel like it's a genuinely a very, very beautiful map. It is the most beautiful indoor map in the game. But it is also the most killer-sided map in the game, because the map is extremely small. Because even though it's technically, most of its space is vertical, so there's technically more space than you think, but it's all vertical. So horizontally, there's not a whole lot of space in the map. Most of the pallet spawns are incredibly weak and circumventable, besides like the one that goes across the hallway and the one that goes across the infirmary. Those are pretty good. The rest of the tiles in this game, in this map, are very circumventable, very, very easily mind gameable, and there are certain rooms that just spawn with absolutely zero pallets or resources. There's no window, there's no pallet, it's just a room full of desks, and that's it, and that's all you have to work with. The outside, the courtyard, has typically one, long wall, short wall tile spawn, and then a useless window tile. And you have the two pallets, so the little place by the clock tower where you can build them a house. But like, that's not too helpful either, because even though those are two technically god pallets, they're just right next to each other, and you run through them very, very quickly. This map is just fundamentally geared towards killer, and that's not even having a conversation about how indoor maps in general are definitely more favorable for stealth killers as well. So stealth killers, they're typically some of the more weak killers in the game. Suddenly have a higher advantage because of the indoor aspect. It's one of the few maps you can do Scratch Mirror Myers on. It's just all around a very, very killer sided map. And when I see people struggle on this map as killer, I always find it very strange, because it shouldn't be that difficult to win matches on Midwich. Kind of the only things they have going for them are, I said, like, there are two god pallets that are really good. One that blocks a whole hallway, one that blocks the infirmary, which is pretty good. If you're a low mobility killer, they can kind of run you around the square, because the map's essentially one big square. They can run you around that square. Which can be kind of frustrating, but for the most part, other than that, like, not really a whole lot of reasons you should be losing, especially consistently on Midwich's killer. It is a very killer-sided map. Another very killer-sided map that I don't see people bring up a lot is Wrecker's Yard. Wrecker's Yard, get off Milan. Wrecker's Yard is a very, very small map, and it has one of the few maps in the game that has a centralized basement. So when you're thinking about utilizing basement, which is one of your great catch-up tools as killer, that has no main building, and that basement will always be in the middle of the map where Shack is. So any sort of map where basement can be centralized automatically errs more on the side of killer, because a lot of maps basement will be out of the way, and it's not really worth it to defend it. But on Wrecker's Yard, especially if you're running like Agitation or Iron Grasp or both, you're gonna always be able to make that basement and defend that basement. and that is pretty strong for you. The only thing that really kind of errs on the survivor side with this map is the fact that the map's very condensed, so a lot of tiles are right next to each other. Most of the time, survivors have to have some sort of sense of skill or map knowledge in order to chain tiles together, you know, make one tile loop into another. But on Wrecker's Yard, everything's so condensed that it's kind of easier than other maps to chain tiles together. But there's no real crazy setups that really happen on Wrecker's Yard. It's kind of just like, you know, the normal things that Auto Haven maps can spawn. It's just that they're all kind of close in together. So I don't know. There's nothing really special about Wrecker's Yard that makes it in any way survivor sided. And the small map on top of the centralized basement, it just bodes better for killer. It just does in every way. Now this is a pick for me as we continue to go on in the killer sided maps. This is a pick for me that I kind of like. I feel kind of icky about. It's one of those things where I have to put my subjectivity aside and put the objectivity forward. Is Dead Dog is just definitely a killer sided map. I personally don't like it very much because I don't like breakable walls as a mechanic, and there's like 17 on this map, and you have to break a ton of them to be able to play the game. But realistically, it's a really, really small map, which, like we were talking about with Wreckers, very much favors the killer. Both the basements are relatively centralized. There's the one that can spawn in Shack, which is definitely centralized and almost creates the Wrecker's Yard situation we just talked about. And then there's the one back behind Saloon, which is not as centralized, but it's still vaguely in the center of the map, so that also benefits you as well. The thing in Dead Dog is one of the, obviously, infamously, the map where Hens pulled off the night match timeout, because 3-gens spawn all over the place on this map. 3-gens are very, very common on Dead Dog Saloon, so obviously if you're a character that wants to, or a player that wants to hold those, they're basically handed to you on a silver platter. But like I said, besides the breakable walls and having to spend all the time kicking the breakable walls, there's really no downside to playing killer on this map. And that's a hard pill I have to swallow, because I hate that so much, and that's what makes me never want to go to Dead Dog Saloon. It makes me think in my head, maybe it's a little bit more balanced, but realistically, it's not. Like, once you kick the doors out of the way, the map's relatively static, so there's no surprises. Most of the tiles are very, very weak. Like, even on the town side, where you kind of get more atypical tiles like LT walls and that sort of thing. There's a breakable wall on the LT wall, so you can do that. There's breakable walls in basically all of those tiles all the way down. There's no like general tiles, which are a little bit more fair and fun for Survivor. It's just not a very strong map. There's not a lot to say here that you can use to your advantage as Survivor. It really isn't. The only thing that's really good for you as Survivor is the main building. But like I said, once they kick out those breakable walls, that main building gets significantly weaker, so who knows. Also, Shack is weaker. Shack is weaker on this map because Shack is larger, but there's a breakable wall right next to the Shack window, so you can circumvent Shack window even easier too. Like, the reasons just keep coming. This is just a very killer sided map. It just is. Okay, so this next one may come as a surprise because some of you would probably put RPD East. This is East, by the way. RPD East in the mostly killer sided, but I'm actually going to plop it up and definitely killer sided. Specifically with East, and we'll talk about West later, is that RPD East is a fairly small map, which is something you see all four of these have in common. Unlike RPD West, RPD East blocks off more of its side, because when they split them up, there's sides of each side of the map that you can't really reach anymore between East and West. And for some reason, East cuts out more of the map than West does. And I'm not sure really why they did that. I figured they would just make them equal, but they didn't. So East just is smaller than West for no reason. And it's really weird. The main thing that makes East super strong, and makes RPD strong for killer in general, spoilers, but especially East, is that the main hall is extremely easy to pressure for killer. Extremely easy to pressure for killer, because you can't get from one side of the map to the other without crossing through this main hall, which obviously as a killer you can use this to pressure basically everyone at the same time, because they have to walk through you to get to any sort of side of the map. It's a choke point. That's the big boy word. It's the choke point. And especially on RPD East, when they're spawning 2 generators in this main hall, you can essentially defend almost half of the objectives in the game just by hanging out in the middle of the main hall. And that's not even to say that, like, well, at least the rest of the map's pretty good. The rest of the map is not very good for a Survivor. You have the officer room, the blue room, which has the window vault and the pallet, which is, pretty all right. That map, that room used to be really busted in the old iteration of RPD. but it's not as strong anymore. You have the rooftop with the crashed helicopter, which has some good pallets there, and you can, you know, obviously circumvent that into going off the window vault that's there. But for the most part, there's really no good setups for Survivor on this map. Like, you have the interrogation room, but like that has a crappy pallet, and that window vault is also easily circumventable. It's essentially just a big old T-wall. The only pallet that I can think is actually like really good that I actually like on the east side is the one at the bottom of the stairs as you're coming in from outside of the balcony. That is just essentially, if you're using it mid-chase, it's just a god pallet. Like, if you smack them with it, it's not a god pallet because it's got a short side on it. But like mid-chase, if you're running back up into the balcony from the inside stairway and you slap the killer with that, they have to kick it. Other than that, like, there's really nothing to write home here about Survivor, especially when we start talking about like the outside gen. The RPD, both of them have this problem that Old Hawkins, which is actually here, funnily enough, Old Hawkins has, where there are safer gens to do, but if you do them early, it kind of hoses your team later. Because if you do the early gens, the safer gens earlier, you're gonna end up in a very, very rough spot. It's always better to try to do the 2 gens in the center of RPD East first, but like a lot of people will just go do the balcony gen, go do the courtyard gen, and then you guys essentially have to play in the middle of the map for the rest of the game, which is really bad. So definitely a very, very killer side map. And it, once again, like we talked about with Midwich, it's an indoor map, so obviously stealth killers that are usually weaker are stronger here. So yeah. And believe it or not, that is it for me in terms of the definitely killer side map. There's actually not a whole lot of like very, very strong, aggressively killer side maps in the game. We're going to go ahead and move down to mostly killer side, where we're going to talk about Shelter Woods. Now, Shelter Woods used to be way, way, way more killer side. I would have put it at like the end of definitely killer sided back in the day. Back when they only had the tree in the center, and that was it. The game, the map had no main building, which was terrible. And it's still a fairly huge map. It's a pretty big map. Its size is deceptively large. But there used to be like nothing in it. So like it didn't really matter too much. But recently when Skull Merchant dropped, they actually added a main building to here and kind of moved the tree off to the side. And this main building is not a whole lot to write home about. Not a whole lot to write home about. The only thing about this main area that's actually really good is that there is a near infinite with that can spawn with the tent vault that you kind of just have to follow them, and you get a guaranteed 1 or 2 vaults before you catch up for a hit. That is a really, really good time waster, but you know, the rest of the map is still old Shelter Woods, where there's not a particularly high pallet count. There's not particularly a lot you can use to get away from the killer. And there's a lot of dead space, not the IP, but there's a lot of dead space in between all this stuff. It definitely feels better to play on as Survivor before, because there's not a whole lot of dead space as there used to be, but there is still a lot of dead space. There's a lot of dead zones on this map still, which is something that people complain about with old Shelter Woods. It's like, oh, there's too many dead zones. You think smacking an entire main building in the middle of it would make it, you know, more beneficial to play on for Survivor, but it still spawns. Like I find 2 or 3 dead zones on this map like every single time I play on it when I'm playing on Survivor. And it's just like, even with the main building in the middle, it doesn't really be helping much. That's not even talking about how all the vaults in the main building are pretty circumventable by killer. That's a very centralized basement that can spawn there. If it does spawn there, it could also spawn in the shack. And that pallet that's in the computer room downstairs is very, very, very easily circumventable by killers. Like, it's just like, it's there and it's better than nothing, but like realistically, killers can still handle Shelter Woods pretty well. So I'm going to put that in mostly killer sided. This might be a little bit of an odd pick, but I'm actually going to put Sanctum of Wrath in mostly killer sided. So we're going to discuss something that's going to be consistent when it comes to talking about maps that are the very small handful of maps that are actually killer sided or mostly killer sided in Dead by Daylight. And that is going to be the eye-shaped maps. So there are maps in Dead by Daylight that are eye-shaped. Like literally like the capital letter I, where there's a flat part, a very skinny center, and then another flat part. And the reason these maps are good for killer is because setting up 3 gens, like we talked about with Dead Dog, is very, very good for killer. Intentionally giving up one side of the map to completely pressure one side is a killer skill that's very, very beneficial, especially if you play somebody who specializes in it, like Skull Merchant or Knight. But these maps, even before those characters, were always good for setting up 3 gens because you can essentially give up one side of the map and pressure the other, and Sanctum is a very, very good map for that. The main building, nothing really to write home about. There's the one window vault on the side that is kind of okay, but it's very easily circumventable if you drop off the top. It does have a shack that, you know, and so that's good. I'm trying to think of things that like go for you in this favor in terms of survivor-sidedness, but really Yamaoka maps, and we'll talk about this when we get to family residence, they don't spawn really intense setups. They kind of just don't really do that. Matter of fact, it's one of the few maps that can spawn a tile that is only a pallet and no window vault whatsoever, like in terms of a jungle gym, which is also possible in Borgo for some reason. There's not really anything in terms of crazy setups. You have some filler pallets here and there. You got the small pagodas, but like once again, those window vaults are very easily interceptable. You can circumvent them pretty easily. You have the, like, I don't know even what to call those tiles. You know, like the hollowed out building where it's like there's the window vault that's over like a little rock ledge. I don't know what to call those, but those aren't particularly strong either. Once again, better than nothing, but the setups on Yamaoka are nothing to really write home about, especially on the eye-shaped map like Sanctum and Wrath. So I'm going to put that actually in mostly killer-sided. And now finally we'll talk about RPD West. RPD West is significantly, I actually thought about putting this in balanced or bad for both sides, but it's going to be on the edge of mostly killer-sided, so I don't really feel bad about that. It has all the same things that make killer strong from a lot of things that make killer strong from the east side, being that main hall that people have to cross through in order to get to the other side. But like I said, when we were discussing RPD East, for some reason RPD West just is a bigger map. Even though it's supposed to be an even split, it's not. West just has both sides for the most part. So you don't have the balcony anymore, but you still have the blue room, which I was mentioning earlier is pretty good. And then you also have most of West Side, which has a lot better loops. There's a lot more in terms of safe pallets. There's that God pallet upstairs by the laundry room, the Star's office. You can waste some time in there. There's also the back courtyard, which has a better pallet setup than the courtyard on the in the front side, which you have both. You can see a theme here. You have both courtyards. So like it's just a little bit bigger of a map to traverse. It still has a lot of the same strengths for you, like as a stealth killer, in terms of guarding the main hall, in terms of, you know, even though the pallet setups are a bit better, the pallet setups in general aren't that crazy. You don't have any like strong window vaults or anything like fantastical here, but you do have to deal with a bigger size map, so that can be kind of arduous at times. I do still think that it errs mostly on the side of killer. This one's gonna be kind of like a hedge one. I feel like this one's more like 60-40. I don't think it's aggressively a killer sided map, but for the most part it is. For the most part, this is one that I actually get a lot of pushback on. I think Azarovs, for the same reason that Yamaoka Sanctum of Wrath is a mostly killer sided map. I think that Azarovs resting place is also a mostly killer side map because of the same reason that we talked about with Sanctum, where it's another eye-shaped map. It's very easy to set up a 3-gen by letting go one side of the map and just defending one side, especially if you're able to shut down them getting that middle gen super early. Like you're basically set for a win. I win most of my matches on Azarovs by contesting that middle gen from the survivors, and then they just kind of fall apart because they're so greedy to get that middle gen done, because they know they have to get it done if they want to prevent a 3-gen situation, that the pressure is essentially free. This office that you're seeing in the photo of the map is not anything to write home about. It's essentially a shack without a pallet. It's a shack without a pallet, so it has a window that's similar to shack, but all it has is a break wall. So once you kick that, it's essentially just a shack without a window, or a shack without a pallet, which is not very good. You don't really last long there. There's some good setups that can spawn on here, especially since they reworked Autohaven a little bit to add more pallets to most of the Autohaven realms. But it's a very like iffy map, because it could also spawn dead zones. It could also spawn a lot of, like, I've gotten like especially on this side, the side that actually has the main building, I'll have like Pride Rock just over on the left, and then like a filler pallet, and that's it. And then you could just very easily just shut down one side of the map, guard the main building side, and all you have is Pride Rock, an LLT wall, and then like a filler pallet. And then you just shut down this side of the map entirely. But other times you can get like, the back side where it's like, okay, you get crane into a truck tile pallet into shack, and then that side's really strong. So it's a little bit, that's why I'm putting this as like the last one that I will consider mostly killer sided, just like with RPD West Wing. This one's more of like a 60-40. It's very on the edge there. I can definitely see why people don't want to put this on a mostly killer sided, but I do think, like I said, it's mostly 60-40. It's just barely. Like I said, that's where we're gonna can it for killer sided maps. That's only 8. It's only 8, and a lot of them not even aggressively so. We're gonna get into balanced and or bad for both sides. Keep that in mind. I'm not saying the map is perfectly balanced. I'm saying, hey, there may be aspects about this that suck for both, and that ergo is its own balance, quote unquote. Rancid is a map that I actually like a lot. I really like playing on this on both sides. I think Rancid is a fairly balanced map, which is, I find it interesting that they're going and reworking it as like their first look at maps for year 8. They're gonna rework Rancid. I thought Rancid was pretty balanced. The main building is like, the window at the back is really, really good, but the window on the side is circumvented by a brick wall. So if you kick that as killer, that makes that inside area very unsafe. You have the possibility of getting Cowtree, which is really good for Survivor, but it's not guaranteed, so you're not going to always have a bad time here. The map is relatively small, unlike the corner maps, most of the corner maps, which we'll get to later. So it's not like you're dealing with the big, huge open map that's really frustrating. There's not really a whole lot in the way of crazy setup. Sometimes the back part of the map where shack spawns, you'll get like a path tile into like an LT wall and a shack, and that can be pretty gross. But usually to the right side of it, it spawns just nothingness. It's just corn, and there's like 2 tiles of space in between you and the next tile, which is kind of like a little baby dead zone. So like it's kind of balanced out by being strong on one side and not on the other. I think Rancid Abattoir is a fairly balanced map. You have, especially like because of its small sides, you can kind of try to set up 3-gen, but it's not always a guarantee that you'll be able to actually set up a true 3-gen, just on the basis of the map being small, but also that there's a lot of dead zones or anything that you could really utilize. I don't know, I feel like it's a fair balanced map. There's really nothing really wrong with it, which is why I'm interested in why they're changing it, because I don't really have a problem with this map. I think it's pretty balanced. Also, the heralded kin, the people, the favorite child of quote unquote balanced maps, that is Cold Tower. Cold Tower, for a lot of people. People think Cold Tower is a completely fine and balanced map, and for the most part, it is. And it kind of errs on the side that it can be bad for both sides in some circumstances, and that's something that I don't see a lot of people talk about. So I guess in terms of that balance, yes, because sometimes, the main building's nothing to write home about. You break a brick wall next to the downstairs window to make it safe for you to chase this killer. It's pretty bad before that, but also that window can spawn right next to a filler tile between the tank tracks that goes into another tile on the left side. And if you get that set up, that's pretty gross for Survivor. Also, if you have watched, if you have watched Otz's videos talking about like the strongest Survivor spawns that he's ever gotten, the strongest Survivor spawn he ever got was on Cold Tower. So you got to keep that in mind, that the thing that killers really like about this map is the main building's nothing to write home about. The map is relatively small without being so small that it's kind of like a pushover, something like Dead Dog or Wreckers. So most people consider this a fairly balanced map, but there's also really strong and good Survivor setups, especially like on that right side where it spawns a bunch of tiles in a row. If you get like a long wall vault facing like another jungle gym, like that could be really good. And I've seen that happen before, and that's disgusting. That's very, very disgusting. I don't know. I feel like for the most part it's balanced, but you got to think, I want you to take this caveat away that it's not like a perfect, map like everybody treats it. It does have kind of a hormonalness to it where it'll snap on you, become super Survivor sided for no reason. Or on the other flip side, where it'll become super killer sided for no reason, where like this dead, like down the center of the map, you'll just have logs and nothing. No filler pallets, it'll just be logs and nothing down the center of the map, down main. And you're just like, where's my stuff? So just keep in mind this map can be very snippy, very easy to err on one side or the other, because a lot of people don't bring that up. So far, we've been mostly talking about maps that are actually balanced, and not really going that parenthesis of like bad for both sides. I'm going to say Wretched Shop is going to be one of those maps that can be bad for both sides. And I mostly boils down to the fact that Wretched Shop is a very like we were just talking about how Cold Tower can sometimes get very angry and just kind of like flip sides and be very aggressively one side or the other. Wretched Shop kind of does that on the daily. It just kind of does. It will either have an extremely low pallet count or an extremely high pallet count, and that's just not good. Sometimes it'll spawn like 20 pallets, and you're like, wow, this is a pretty good survivor map. Sometimes it'll spawn like below 10. And it's just like that's a huge difference. That's a huge difference. To go from below 10 to around 20 pallets, that's literally a doubling your pallet count. Like, if they wanted to make this map more consistent, that would be the first thing I would adjust, is like find a median in there. Find a median in there. Make it the average more, make the average more consistent, because right now it just kind of like either completely airs on one side or the other, and it's just, I don't know why it does that. It's very odd. Also, the main building is designed inherently to be very one side or the other. If the main building spawns facing away from the center of the map, as killer, you have to go all the way around and to the back of the map and then in the main building to defend that gen. But if it faces the center of the map, it's a super easy gen to defend for killer. Also talking about that window that's in there. Obviously, if the window vault is next to the brick wall, you break the wall and suddenly that window is super easy to circumvent. Or, you know, if the brick wall is on the other side, then suddenly like that window vault is like actually just good. So it's just a very random map, and for that reason it's bad. It can be bad for both sides. It just depends on how it spawns, which makes it pretty inconsistent. This is one that a lot of people put in the killer side, and you're probably noticing that I didn't put it there, and that is Lery's Memorial Institute. So Lery's, I feel like, I don't know how I feel, if it's balanced in a good way or if it's balanced in the fact that it's bad for both sides, but I feel like survivors very heavily undervalue Lery's, because Lery's has a very high pallet count. It spawns a very high pallet count, like in the 20s. It's very pallet dense. There's windows everywhere. A lot of these pallets are not easily circumventable. They'll block whole hallways. They'll block entire sides of rooms, so you have to kick them, and then there'll be a window vault next to that. So even though while you're kicking that, they just vault out the window and then they leave. There's a lot of really good survivor setups on this map. There's one that spawns in that side hallway next to the bunk bedroom, that you can get the god pallet across the hallway, the two open doors into the bunk bedroom, which has a safe pallet inside it, and then there's vaults off to the sides, and you could waste a killer's time there for so long. Talk about like the treatment theater itself, the quote-unquote main of the area. You have that window next to the staircase, which is almost completely safe, and you get pallets all around you for that. Like this, it's a deceptively good map for Survivor, and I think it's just the fact that it is an indoor map, so without windows of opportunity, you don't really know where you're going a lot of the time. I think that's like a lot of survivors suffer on Lery's, and if you know, I feel like survivors that bring windows of opportunity and go to Lery's perform better because they don't have that issue. This map's kind of like a little, it's kind of like Yamaoka Residence, where it's kind of like a football field too. So like going from one edge to the other is pretty annoying, especially since that you know, because it's an indoor map and there's walls and rooms everywhere. A lot of movement power killers can't really utilize their power very well. But it is still an indoor map, which, you know, like we said earlier, favors stealth killers, whereas stealth killers typically are not the strongest. And obviously that confusion, like I was talking about, like if you don't have windows, you don't really know where to go a lot. And if you have that uncertainty, uncertainty typically favors the killer in most circumstances. And while this map does spawn a lot of pallets, a lot of them are really strong, but a lot of them are really weak as well. There's a lot of pallets that are very easily circumventable. There's a bunch in the main area of the treatment theater that you can just walk from one side to the other, and they're pretty easily beat. Also, you got to think about the RNG of the doors, because the door spawns in each room are RNG. They are not consistent, so that plays a factor as well. But I just want to, I put this in the center. I think I feel like survivors underrate this map because survivors hate indoor maps. But realistically, it's a lot stronger than people think it is. So, all right, probably the king of bad for both sides, Haddonfield. I feel like Haddonfield is like the poster child of the parentheses that I put there, bad for both sides. Because the main buildings are totally overpowered for Survivor. Completely overpowered for Survivor. You got Myers' house, which has obviously got that super strong vault at the front. And then you can just, now there's a new, they've orientated it differently now with the window vaults upstairs. So you can literally vault out the top on the right side of Myers' house, drop down, come back around to the front porch, and go in that window now. So there's a whole new overpowered setup that you can do with that. Obviously, the houses on the other side have double vault windows, which you can just, you know, pick one or the other and go through all day and night. And, you know, even killers with some way to circumvent that usually have some struggles with that. The buildings and the window vaults in this map are super strong, super terrible for killer. And this map also spawns House of Pain. It is a weaker version of House of Pain because it's all pallets and not window vaults. But you have 2 or 3 pallets at your disposal to use in House of Pain to waste the killer's time. And it's just, the buildings in this map are just super strong. Like, they're just, like, aggressively so. They are very, like, anti-killer. Which you may be thinking, like, okay, well, this is just an OP Survivor map. It's like, no, because in between the buildings, there's, like, quite literally nothing. There's, like, nothing in the way of typical loops. There's nothing in the way of safe pallets. Like, almost every pallet that is outside of the main buildings or the buildings themselves are very weak, or you have to throw them, and once they're gone, it's a dead zone for like 10 miles around. Like, the middle of the street, there's 1 or 2 pallets, and that's it. Then you're done. And then that's it. You're donezo. And there's so much dead space, so many dead zones all over this map. So, like, yeah, if you're at a main building or one of the buildings, yeah, you're going to be able to run the killer for a long time, but God forbid you actually get caught out in the middle of the street trying to traverse to another gen or something, and then you just, like, get caught out, and there's quite literally, and I do mean no exaggeration, quite literally nothing for you to defend yourself with. Quite literally nothing to defend yourself with. Nothing at all. And it's just, like, it's simultaneously aggressively killer side and aggressively survivor side at the same time. It's just bad. It's just bad for both sides. Nobody has a good time on this map, and it's just, like, I mean, is that better than having it be, like, one of the most survivor side maps in the game like it used to be? I don't know, but that's what it is now. It's just nobody likes going here. Speaking of maps where nobody likes to go, look, it's Pale Rose. I am shocked to hear that DBD Behavior is going to be reworking Fractured Cowshed and Rancid Arbitrary before they're doing the swamp maps, because the swamp maps not only graphically are very behind in terms of, like, the reworks, but also in terms of gameplay are very, very behind in terms of the reworks. You have the Pale Rose, the boat itself, which has a special ability that most other main buildings don't have, which if you go near it, the crows, like an entire murder of crows flies up, letting everybody on the map know somebody's there. That's very good for killer. It's very good info for both sides, to be fair, but mostly for killer. The center of the map is kind of nothing to really write home about going up into it. There's usually a pallet or two, and sometimes they're just nothing. It's another one of those map areas that's just very, like, it's very, like, it can very aggressively go one side or the other, or not at all, and it's just like, what? The boat is okay. You usually have 1 good pallet downstairs and 1 good pallet upstairs. And then a couple window vaults, but, like, once those are out of the way, the boat's pretty much useless. The vaults will not save you once those pallets are out of the way. The piers can spawn in good orientations, but the piers are mostly just kind of, like, confusing and easily circumventable by killer as well, especially on Pale Rose in particular, where that pier spawns. On the other side of that pier, you can end up with only, like, 1 or 2 pallets. If, like, you can end up like 1 or 2 pallets, and that's it. And I've ended up in a lot of situations on Survivor on that other side of the pier where, like, I'll have, like, a ghost face or something just, like, come around the side of the pier, and because I only have, like, 1 or 2 pallets to my name, and if God forbid somebody's already thrown one, I'm just an easy stock because that corner of the map is pretty separated from the rest of the map. Small boat, not really something to write home about. Yeah, there's, besides getting your life off, that's a pretty weak vault. You do get 1 tile at the back right of the map, which, you know, can be good or bad. It can be a 4-lane, it can be an LT wall, it could be an actual formal jungle gym, and depending on how that spawns, that could help you a lot. You get pog logs, but they're mostly in the corners of the map. It's not really helpful. Nobody really enjoys going to this map. Nobody really enjoys going to this map. It's just kind of like, it's very ick. It's just an ick map. So yeah, it's bad for both sides. All right, this map, you probably more thought that it would probably be more on the mostly survivor sided, but I'm going to explain it real quick. So yeah, Suffocation Pit is in a lot of ways can err on being mostly survivor-sided. This is going to be one of the more fringe ones. That's more like 60-40, like I was talking about earlier. Because the center of Suffocation Pit, no matter how it spawns, is almost always survivor-sided, almost aggressively always survivor-sided. It would be astronomically low chances for you to get a bad center on Suffocation Pit, just because just the mere idea of that many tiles spawning that close to each other makes chaining tiles super easy and makes it very easy to get away from killers, especially ones that don't really have powers to circumvent loops very well. So the center of Suffocation Pit will always be good. But like I talked about earlier, Suffocation Pit is one of those eye tiles. Like we talked, eye-shaped maps like Azarovs and Sanctum. So just the difference being the eye at the center of Suffocation Pit is just very, very strong to try and mitigate the fact that it is an eye map. So like realistically, if they wanted to take these out of the killer zone, they would probably put more stuff in the middle of here. Because that's what they did with Suffocation Pit, is they just made the center super duper strong. That way the fact that it is a choke point is not as much of a detriment to the survivors. But the thing that would make that not fully survivor side is the fact that what spawns on the other end of the eyes, up at the top with the actual Suffo Pit main building, and also down by the shack side, is very iffy. It's very iffy. I have seen some of the most bare dead zones I have ever seen on this map, which is funny because it's Suffocation Pit, where, you know, there's such an abundance of tiles in the middle, but you'll end up with like Suffocation Pit on the top, and then there'll be Pride Rock and logs, and then one filler pallet, and that's it. That's it. That's all. Now, of course, Suffocation Pit itself, the actual main building, spawns with 1 or 2 pallets around it, but like one filler pallet and that's it outside of main building. That's 3 pallets on one side of an entire map, especially a 3-genning map, but like Suffocation Pit. That's not good. Flip side, I've been to the other end of that map, where it'll be 1 filler pallet, shack, bunch of tank tracks into a Pride Rock. And that's all you have on the other side. And it's like, oh my God, but you have to go there to do the gens in order to finish the match. So you can't just like avoid the weak parts of the map. You have to go there. So it's weirdly kind of like, once again, it kind of ends up in this weird situation where it's kind of like bad for both sides. Because like killers don't want to be in the center of Suffo Pit because it's super strong for Survivor, but survivors don't want to be on Suffo Pit because there's the amount of dead zones that spawn on each side of the center. So it is one of those that kind of ends up being bad for both sides a lot. Next, we're going to talk about Yamaoka Family Residence, not the Death Pagoda, but the other one. Yamaoka Residence is just kind of just a giant football field, and there's really not anything to write home about. Like I've talked about in the Sanctum of Wrath map, is that there's kind of like no real strong or crazy setups that can really spawn on this map. The small pagodas are not very helpful for Survivor, but it kind of, most of your pain as killer comes from the fact that the map's just really long, so it's kind of really hard to defend your gens, because there could be 3 up near the top of the map near main building, and that main building's nothing to write home about. It can spawn some actually, it can spawn some pretty good windows, but obviously, those are always accompanied by breakable walls that you can kick and get them out of the way. Probably the strongest side of the map is the top right, like probably that like 1 o'clock ish zone, where it can be a jungle gym into one of the hollowed out building tiles, into like a safe pallet from a fallen log, into another tile. Like that right side's pretty good, which is kind of like this map's saving grace. But the centers can be pretty dead. But like I said, the small pagodas don't really help you. If you get a lot of filler pallets, that's nice, but once again, it's kind of up to RNG. It's a very, like, the survivor, if you're playing a survivor on this map, you're not going to have any like really fun like 4-gen chases or anything like this, because the map's just kind of like a little too spaced out to really do that. So you're not really having like a big loop with a lot of resources. But also on the flip side, killers aren't having a good time because they have to traverse the map and how long it is to be able to pressure gens. It's just kind of not the best of either worlds. It's kind of ick for both. To top off the balance or bad for both sides, I'm going to put Thompson House here. Thompson House is a map I personally hate going to. I don't enjoy going here because it kind of has a similar problem to Family Residence that we just mentioned, where it's kind of a big, long football field. That's really, really annoying to traverse as killer, but there's also some bonuses to playing killer here. The main building is not too strong. There's like even the windows that like you have to break walls to get around aren't too great by themselves anyway. The pallets that used to be outside Torment Creek used to be really strong. Ever since it got reworked, those are pretty weak now, and not very much in your favor. There's also a lot of dead zones a lot of dead zones on this map. Like on the right side, if we're looking at like a clock, you're looking at like 1-2 o'clock. That side of the map to the right is very, very there can be filler pallets. You got a couple tiles there, like formal and general tiles that can be good. And that leads all the way back into shack. And that whole line on the right side could be pretty good for survivor, but on that back left side, you have one tile over there, and then it's just like a bunch of corn into like the tractor or back into like cow tree. And that's just like that if you get caught there survivor and the gen spawns there and you have to go back there to do that gen, there's literally nothing around. There's literally nothing around there. You better hope you had sprint burst, because if a killer comes over there and pressures you in that back corner, like there's really not a whole lot of there for you to use, because the center is pretty much a dead zone, and then that back left's pretty much a dead zone. So while one side of the map is pretty compact and has a lot of survivor resources, the other side does not. Also, the shack is in the very, very far back, which is good for survivor in the sense that it's, you know, there's no centralized basement to abuse. But also at the same time, you can't really change shack into other things when it's literally up against a freaking corner. So it's like, this map is kind of like the fact that it is kind of, you know, there's benefits to both sides. I think the fact that it is a long map kind of airs more on the side of survivor, but that's why we're going to talk about 60-40. It's mostly for both sides, but you know, mostly just a sliver. Okay, now we're gonna be getting into mostly survivor sided, into definitely survivor sided, which you're gonna notice is a majority of the maps in the game. It's just kind of how Dead by Daylight is built. Talk about first mostly survivor side, Ironworks and Misery. The one thing that is actually kind of killer sided for this map is that the top left, kind of like that 11 o'clock zone, is that you always get the logs into a very weak area, whether that be Pride Rock or just one filler pallet. That top left area, when that gen spawns, is very, very weak for survivor. Killers can take a big advantage of this. But if you get that gen done early, you don't ever have to go there again. Shack will always spawn right next to two general tiles, which, depending on if those are LLT walls or like full jungle gyms, can be very, very strong for survivor or for you as killer. But they're still generally good time wasters. The only thing that kind of gets iffy in the main center of the map is that, I won't even say that, because like you can get Pride Rock spawned right behind the Ironworks. But even then, that usually spawns a couple filler pallets into shack, so you can just leave that and go to the filler pallets. The back right is that whole right side of the map's pretty good for survivor, because you have a general tile into a path pallet, typically into another general tile, and then on the other side of Ironworks, there's general tiles along the top as well. There's a lot of general tiles in this map, which is obviously why it airs mostly on the side of survivor. The Ironworks itself isn't a whole lot to write home about. It's kind of like the reason that it's fairly low on mostly survivor sided. You can waste some time upstairs by forcing them to break that breakable wall up top of the Ironworks, but other than that, that's it. That's all the Ironworks has for you. There's a kind of a crappy little vault of like crumbling part of the wall that you can use, but that's not really that good unless you have life. There's some pallets around the edge, which, you know, can provide some, but some are strong and some are weak. The main building's not too strong. It is big. It's a very big main building, so there's a time waste in that regard, but like the main building isn't too tremendously strong. Obviously has a centralized basement if basement does spawn down there. But yeah, it's mostly survivor side, just on the basis that there's kind of, besides that top left corner that I mentioned by the logs, kind of basically like one dead zone, and the rest of the map's pretty resource filled. So you're not going to be running into a whole lot of dead zones while playing on Ironworks. So that makes it obviously pretty survivor side. Talk about Blood Log, that thing if you have, you should probably call a doctor. Good old Blood Lodge. Blood Lodge recently got a rework that added more pallets to it, kind of changed the orientation a little bit. And Blood Lodge was already a very large map. And that obviously, you know, larger maps kind of favor survivors more because there's more places for them to hide and be safe while doing generators. And now they've added more pallets to it and changed the orientation a fair bit. So it definitely has increased the way that it is mostly survivor sided. The shack is always around things now because the orientation is different. So you always have like a path pallet or something into shack. It feels like every time I've played there since the update, I've always had something into shack. that I can use. And whenever there's tiles or even path palettes into Shack, that obviously increases the strength of that map for survivors a fair bit. Yeah, it's just this one's not really that complicated. It's a very large map with a lot of resources. It's really nothing crazy, nothing to write home about, nothing that's like complicated. Big map, a lot of pallets. Like, that's what I gotta say. Big map, a lot of pallets. Blood used to be worse back in the day, way before its rework. It used to be even worse than this. It used to be even bigger and had even more pallets. So this is the better version, which is funny. But yeah, big map, a lot of pallets. That's the only takeaway here. This map, Father Campbell's Soup, Father Campbell's Chapel, used to be one of my favorite maps in the game, aesthetically. But then its rework kind of made it really drab and ick. But Father Campbell's Chapel, it could be fairly farther down on this, probably even definitely survivor-sided, but it's kind of based on how things spawn. The Carnival, not really a whole lot to write home about. It's just the you got the vault and the carriage and probably a couple filler pallets up there. Not really too strong. But the thing that makes this map super strong is the main building can spawn fairly angrily towards killer. There's a god window that can spawn right next to where basement can spawn in the middle of main building. There's a window that can spawn right next to the gen that's up there that you have to vault after them because they can just run away. There's a vault at the back, the little wooden, you know how there's a hole in the wall that's got the little wooden support planks. That vault's really good. You have to kick breakable walls to get around that. Even then, the breakable walls don't help too incredibly much. There's a lot of tiles all around Chapel as well, like general tiles. Sometimes you get long wall, short walls. Sometimes you'll get like actual formal tiles, like an LLT wall into like a jungle gym. Like there's a lot. And the thing that makes both the Chapel, like the Asylum maps really, really strong is there's always a tile and jungle gym of some sort that leads into Shack on both of these maps, which is, like we were talking about earlier, having anything spawn into Shack makes it way, way, way more survivor-sided. But the fact that both the Asylum maps have a guaranteed tile, like a full jungle gym spawn into Shack, makes them incredibly strong. So that in tandem with the God window that can possibly spawn, so you get the God window, vault, and then you can, depending on the orientation of the building, go into a long wall, short wall, and then drop that pallet, run towards the jungle gym that leads into Shack. Like there's a lot of ways to waste a lot of time on this map depending on how it spawns. The only reason it's not further is because it can also spawn the opposite way, where like you get all the bad spawns. Like there's just a breakable wall where that God window is, which doesn't help you at all. Sometimes you just get a bunch of LLT walls, which is still better to have than nothing, but not really a very impressive spawn. There could also be kind of like a weird dead zone that happens on the one side of the map, where Jen can spawn next to Pride Rock, and you don't really have anything to help you until you run back towards Shack, which is, you know, depending on if there's anything there, you will definitely take hits trying to make something. But yeah, that's the thing that doesn't make it any higher on the list, but it's a fairly survivor-sided map. Rotten Fields. Okay, Rotten Fields is a controversial one for this, because a lot of people put Rotten Fields actually, I don't know, I feel like some people put like Rotten Fields like pretty aggressively survivor-sided, and a lot of people put it like up and killer-sided. And it's because like I feel like people see a lot of the dead space that's in the middle of the map, like a lot of the dead zones in the middle of the map, and kind of see it as like, oh, well, clearly that's bad for Survivor. Or, you know, they see the centralized, because there's no main building, it's just Shack, and that's obviously a centralized basement, and they go, well, that's good for killer. So a lot of people want to put it up here. I'm actually going to put it in Survivor side because it is the only map in the game, the actual only corn map in the game, that is a guaranteed spawn of cow tree. Every other map is not a guaranteed spawn of cow tree. It's an RNG thing, but on Rotten Fields, it's guaranteed. And the entire outside ring of the map, despite that middle zone being kind of dead, is entirely connected all the way around. There will always be something for you all the way around the circle of the map. All the way around the circle of the map. So that's kind of like in terms of just guaranteed value, which you'll see when we talk about Garden of Joy later, is like the fact that there is always to be guaranteed resources for you all the way around the map. It's pretty good. That's pretty good. That's pretty neat. And also that guaranteed cow tree ain't too shabby. That's pretty good for you. That being said, a lot of killer powers get kind of like messed up on this map too, like Blight, nothing to bump into, Wesker's not a lot of stuff to throw into, and those are some of the more stronger characters in the game as well. Like there's a lot of killer powers that kind of go bump in the night here. It does not go burr nearly as well. So there's a lot that really go for you here. It's a pretty simple why it's actually survivor-sided. Like, just the fact that there is one long chain that you can do around the entire circle of the map is pretty good. It's pretty good. You're very rarely going to run into dead zones on this map, besides just that little center area between going there from your outside ring into shack. So yeah, it's pretty straightforward. All right, so this one, we're gonna start talking about the cubby maps. The cubby maps. I'll tell you real quick what I mean by the cubbies. If this map is built fairly oddly, I'll probably put an image over here if I have not been doing that already. That this map is actually fairly oddly designed in the fact that there's a big center mass of an area, but there's these little cabinets, little cubbies off on the sides. Which for you as killer, having to go in there and defend them, one of the things that's really good about killer that a lot of emerging killers don't understand is that you have a lot of ambient pressure, as I call it sometimes, ambient pressure, which means just by having a tear radius, just by chasing people and having the uncertainty of where you're actually chasing that person outside of people on comms, kind of creates an ambient pressure of people not wanting to go to certain gens, people kind of spacing out away from where you're happening to be relatively, pressuring. Essentially, you have just kind of like a natural push just existing as killer on the map. But with these cubbies, if you go down into one of these cubbies, your ambient pressure is cut because you're literally in a corner, which leaves this entire huge chunk of the map off to the side, like very open. And obviously, if they don't, at that point, they're not even hearing your tear radius, unless you're somebody like Wesker with distressing. Like, they're not even hearing your tear radius, so they're going to assume they're safe to do whatever they want on that left side of the map. Or on the most of the map, rather, like 80% of the map, they're going to assume they're safe and they can just do things, and rightfully so. So it's a big time waster to go into these cubbies, and usually these cubbies have like multiple tiles, multiple general like jungle gyms that spawn inside of them as well, that are good time wasters. On top of already being a time waster to go that deep into the map, that's basically just a corner and a dead end. Main building has a vault that you can just break a breakable wall to get through. But that's in conjunction with having tiles relatively around that main building. It can spawn some dead zones. It can actually spawn some pretty fierce dead zones. And it's kind of like these stretches, like in between. Like, you have a tile at the top left, but there'll be a little stretch of space in between that and the other tile at the other corner. But, sometimes there's filler pallets there and sometimes there's not. But the cubby part of this kind of overpowers the fact that those in between spaces may be a little awkward here and there. There's also a lot of filler tiles into shack that spawns a lot. You'll get a lot of filler pallets into shack. Like we talked about, having any sort of tile into shack is super good. So having a bunch of filler tiles into shack is also a very, very good thing. All right, so this map. I love this map on Survivor, which should tell you that it's fairly Survivor-sided. Grim Pantry is Survivor-sided, if not only for the fact that the main building and the side building and shack are all oriented very well. Very well. The Grim Pantry, the main building itself, you have a bottom, which has a bunch of pallets below, which is good for you, and a window vault. And the top, you have a very, very wonderful loop where you have a very, very strong window vault that killers can't circumvent unless they, like, bamboozle it. And then you have the two side windows on the side that you can use to help circumvent the chase as well. Even if the killer starts catching up, there's pallets up top as well you can use. That once you get bloodlusted, after going through a bunch of windows up top, that you can just go over to those and smack them. And once they kick the pallet, they lose bloodlust. You go back to the window loop. The main building of Grim Pantry is so strong. So strong. I love this loop, but I know it's BS. Like, I love playing this loop on Survivor, but I know it's garbage. I know it's stupid. The tiny pantry, I've heard people call it the chicken coop. Is that what it's supposed to be? But the tiny pantry, that has a very, very good pallet. Also, that window vault is pretty nice. There's always a guaranteed spawn of the pallet as well. So that's good. Shack is almost always going to spawn into something helpful, whether that be a filler pallet or a tile nearby. You always have something at your disposal. You have a way to leave shack and keep your safety, which is very good. Like we talked about, Survivor-sided thing. Stuff spawning into shack is really good. The pier is off in the corner of the map. So unlike we had the issue with, we were talking about Pale Rose earlier, where the pier kind of spawns in an awkward place where it could create a dead zone on one side of the map. If a killer can essentially cut you off in a corner. This doesn't do that because the pier is in the corner. So there's no reason you would be in the back corner of the map. So you're not going to get cut out in a dead zone or anything by going to the other side of the pier, which is a problem that Pale Rose has. The pier is actually well placed. The thing that makes this not definitely Survivor-sided is the same problem that Pale Rose has, where that center of the map is very awkward. It'll either spawn a bunch of pallets and be super good, or it'll spawn quite literally nothing, or like a Pride Rock, and you're just like, gee, thanks, this doesn't help me at all. So that center of the map can be pretty strong for killer, based if like nothing spawns there or very little spawns there. That's the only thing not making this like aggressively survivor side, like definitely survivor sided. Also, hexes suck on this map. I wanted to bring this up. I almost forgot. Hexes suck on this map because there's a bunch. There's like 3 confirmed totem spawns. There's like 3 confirmed totem spawns. So if you bring a hex to this map as killer, like they can check 3 places right away and basically find your hex most of the time. So there's also that. Okay, I'm trying to be more brief. This video is very long. Mount Ormond. Mount Ormond Resort. Ormond is a very, very, always has been a survivor side map. It used to be the strongest survivors side map in the game before the rework. Very, very huge map. Very, very huge map. And most of the map space is taken up by the main building, which is also a fairly strong structure. It spawns a god pallet upstairs in the balcony. You have a nice filler pallet in the front lobby reception area. You also have a window vault upstairs in like the bedrooms, which you can vault out, drop, and vault back in behind the bar. And if they haven't broken that breakable wall yet, that's a safe getaway. There's also occasionally a safe pallet that will spawn by the luggage. It's a very, very good main building. Very, very good main building. That's not even considering stuff like life, considering stuff like balanced. It's so good. It also, the main building is connected on either side by resources on almost every side. You have the snowplow loop, which is a safe loop off to the left of that. Looking at the top, if you're looking at the top left of the map, you're looking at like that 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock area. You have a potential of that area. I have had 4 filler pallets into that jungle gym back there. There's a lot of filler pallets that spawn on the top side. You know how you look up at the top, you're going towards 12 o'clock, and there's that middle rock, like that little rock pile that's down the middle. That is fairly weak. That's kind of a dead zone. There's nothing you can really do with that. But on the other side of that, there's just like filler pallet, filler pallet, filler pallet, tile, filler pallet, filler pallet, filler pallet, tile, and then it's the small shack. And then that small shack side kind of spawns dead zone-y a lot. And then it's filler pallet, filler pallet, filler pallet, all the way down the right side into shack, filler pallet, tile, filler pallet, tile. Like it's almost kind of like Rotten Fields, and like the edge of the map is almost one consistent loop. And that's really good. That's really good. Now, sometimes Ormond kind of gets very angsty and kind of decides to not give you things. But by and large, for the most part, it's giving you almost a full loop around the map and that main building on top of it. Like that's why it's like Rotten Fields up here and this is here. Because imagine if Rotten Fields, just on top of having that loop all the way around the map, also had a really good main building. That's Ormond. That's Ormond for you. And being a huge map compared to Rotten Fields, which is relatively smaller. All right, this map that I hate this map. I hate Torment Creek. I feel like if there's a map that like I personally have a really low, like very, very low win rate on, it's Torment Creek. Torment Creek is a giant map. It's so long and so big. And it can spawn some of the most busted, annoying setups that I have seen in this game. Like, not talking about like obvious picks like Garden of Joy, which is kind of statically built to be annoying as heck. Like Torment Creek can spawn like, okay, obviously you have the breakable wall with that window that you have to break to circumvent that. And then there'll be like 4 or 5 or 6 filler pallets all around the main building, which all leads back into the main building. The fallen silo is such an annoying structure to deal with. There's nothing really crazy about it. Like nothing like Ormond, where it's like, oh, hey, well, look at all these resources in these vaults and stuff. Like, it's literally just like tons and tons of inconveniently placed pallets that are just, it's annoying main building, because it's like there's nothing crazy strong like a god window like on Garden of Joy, but like everything is just so conveniently just barely too annoying to just like circumvent it. You have to deal with all these pallets, and it's just so annoying. It's so annoying. I hate that main building. And there's almost always like filler pallets and tiles all the way down the center. The cow tree can spawn there. Shack is right there too. Like this just, there's not really, if you're noticing, there's not a whole lot of dead zones on maps that are fairly survivor side. This is a map that doesn't really like to spawn a lot of dead zones. You'll sometimes get one over to the right. Talking about like that 9 o'clock area. Where there's just a bunch of corn and there's just a gen there and there's like nothing else. But that's like literally the only dead zone on this map. Everything else is very dense with tiles and filler pallets, and it's just that on top of the size. It kind of gives me the feelings of like Yamaoka Residence, where it's like a giant football field I have to traverse. But if the main building of Yamaoka Residence was actually super annoying with like 13 billion pallets, and Yamaoka Residence also had tiles and filler pallets all the way through. Like it is Yamaoka Residence on steroids, it feels like, and I hate this map for that reason. Okay, so this is a big one that's controversial because I know a lot of people put this one on the killer side of things, and I just don't see it. The meatpacking plant is definitely, clearly survivor-sided. So the idea is that, so the game, the meatpacking plant, has one of the highest pallet counts in the game, like airing 25 plus pallets sometimes. Just a lot. That's a lot, and most of them are safe and uncircumventable. And to me, that clearly says that it is a survivor-sided map, because so many killers, especially some of the stronger killers, like Blight, can even suffer, unless you're using like Compound 33, can suffer when you just pre-drop in their face. A lot of killers are circumvented just by pre-dropping, especially the weaker ones, like the M1 killers. They get circumvented by pre-dropping. And when you have 25 plus pallets to drop, yeah, you bet your bottom dollar that's going to be annoying. And the idea is that, like, well, eventually they're going to run out of pallets, because pallets are temporary, windows are forever, right? And there's like 3 vaults on this entire map, or something very, very absurdly low like that. 3 usable vaults. There's some weird ones that you're never gonna use, but like 3 like usable vaults on this map that you'll actually get value out of. So the idea is that, like, well, just, you know, war of attrition, just wait it out. But like if you're playing like Clown or Myers or something like that, like you play that game where you chase them down and just eat through the pallets. That's three or 4 gens popping while you're trying to like get all these pallets out of the way to create a dead zone for later. Like, yeah, maybe on like Nurse, who doesn't have to worry about that, maybe. But like other killers that don't have a way to just get through pallets quickly or just circumvent them entirely, like, that's a lot of resources. That's a lot of resources. And there are some very inconvenient spots too. Like the back area by the bathrooms, that basement will always be there. But there's 2 pallets out of there, so getting out of basement is very easy for the survivors. Up top of that, on the top floor, there's like tons of, there's 2 more of those like god pallets up on the top as well. And it's a very big time wasting area because there's nothing back there. A gen never spawns in that back corner. Where, isn't that where like Jigsaw sleeps in the movie, right? Isn't that where he like hangs out? It's right by the security cams and stuff. Like that room, there's never a gen back there, so there's no reason to go back there. It's literally just a big old time waster. And I get also that like it's a fairly small map. It's a deceptively small map because most of the space is vertical, kind of like Midwich. So you're getting value out of Jolt. Somebody like Skull Merchant can just throw a drone and just like control like a third of the map. Like I get that. But besides, these are exceptions, not the rule. The rule is mostly this map sucks to play on because 25 plus pallets, most of them are safe. And I will not budge. I will not. All right, so new Eyrie of Crows. Eyrie of Crows used to be, I would put it down here back in the day, but it got reworked to become a small map, a smaller map. It used to be a giant football field like Torment Creek and Yamaoka. Now it's a little bit more fair in size. It still retains the things that make it a very, very obnoxious map to play on. It's just that there's less of it now. It's like that's literally it. Like the fact that the problem with old Eyrie of Crows was that it was a very, very large map with a lot of resources tying it together. Basically, like no dead zones. There was like 1 dead zone by the fountain that's by main building, and that's basically it. Every other area was like tied together by either filler pallets or actual full-on tiles. There's some really, really busted setups that can spawn on this map even now, even its normal version. Up by that fountain, speaking of which, up by that fountain, I remember looping a Wesker for like 3 minutes because there was a filler pallet there. So Shack spawns in that back left corner. So we're talking like, thinking about the clock, like 8, 7 o'clock, like down in there. There's Shack that spawns there, and then there was a filler tile or filler pallet into a jungle gym, like a formal jungle gym, like an L-wall jungle gym. No. So there was Shack back there at that 8 o'clock area, into a filler pallet, into a long wall jungle gym, and the window faced outward into a filler pallet. So what I was able to do was go between Shack, filler pallet, long wall jungle gym, vault that long wall into a filler pallet and back. And I looped a Wesker there for like 3 minutes on New Eyrie, not even the old one, New Eyrie of Crows. This map can spawn some very busted and crazy setups, and it can do that on the right side too. The right side is also like that, going up where that weird upraised like platform tile is. You can get formal tile there to the right, into a filler pallet, into another formal tile, and like all the way down that way too. So like this map is pretty interconnected. You kind of like the back side of the map and the top side of the map, so like above main building and below the arch, are pretty much dead zones, especially if you get that little pit tile that spawns next to shacks sometimes. But other than that, like, this map is still mostly largely just a big interconnected tile, like we were talking about with like Torment Creek, Haddonfields, that sort of thing, which makes it pretty strong. Still. So yeah. All right, Temple of Purgation. I actually do like Temple of Purgation a lot, both on Killer and Survivor. I did like it more on Killer before the rework, because the rework has some interesting tiles that are a little bit stronger for Survivor. The mini Pride Rocks, as I call them, have been buffed for Survivor because you can only go up them on one side now, or like 1.5 sides. It used to be those little half rocks that the gens would spawn on. You could go up on multiple sides and kick the Survivor off. Now, you literally can't go up on one side or the other. You have to go to a specific area. So that kind of cuts off the killer's ability to pressure those gens. This map mostly just... The problem with it is that it's super long. It's kind of like Ormond, where it has that super big main building in the center that kind of like funnels it. But the problem with Temple is, unlike Ormond, which mostly just has filler pallets into tiles, the quote-unquote filler pallets on Temple of Purgation are really good. Like, really good. Like, the log... I call them log tiles. You'll have a fallen log. Sorry for the mic. You'll have a log tile that's long on one side and long on the other side. They're like little baby long wall, short walls, which makes them like really good because you have to kick them, because there's not really a good way to circumvent them. So you have your filler tiles on top of actually having filler tiles, not just the log tiles, are really good, like really good. And like I mentioned, the new Pride Rock, the new mini Pride Rocks are really safe for you to do the gens up on. There's a lot of clutter on this map now since the remake, which we'll talk about in Mother's Dwelling as well, which makes it hard for a lot of killers to traverse the map and use their powers. Map's just really good. Map's just really good. It's very fairly Survivor sided for the most part. The only situation is sometimes the only thing I can think that's even slightly killer sided in this map is that sometimes that archway that spawns like kind of like that 6 o'clock zone, sometimes that just won't spawn pallets for some reason. I don't know why. Most of the time it does. Sometimes it just doesn't spawn a pallet there, and then you're just dead. But that's like the only like dead zone you'll get on this map. So yeah. Okay, Decimated Borgo. This map is if it weren't for certain killers having a better time on this map, this would definitely be definitely Survivor sided. Borgo is a very large map, which obviously doesn't err on the side of killer, and it's a very densely high pallet counted map. There's essentially no dead zones. You kind of get this weird zone, like there's kind of like a weirdly like a Shelter Woods S tree that spawns next to the main building, next to a well, and that kind of doesn't have anything going on with it. There's also this one weird tile that's like a little barn, and there's no window vault or anything. It's just a nothing tile. So those err on the side of killer, but otherwise you will almost always have resources on this map. There are filler tiles and really good filler tiles everywhere, like literally everywhere. Like almost everything on this map is interconnected. You also have what we like to call them fake shacks, where you'll have a shack spawn, except it'll only have the pallet or it'll only have the window, in addition to a normal shack that has both. So you'll have, in addition to having normal shack, which is window vault and a pallet, which is really good, you'll also have little mini versions of shack, like 2 more of them across the map. One spawns just the window, no pallet, and the other one spawns the pallet, not the window, which is really good. Also, there is another RNG aspect to this that may err on the side of the killer. If you get the gallows is not very helpful for Survivor at all. It doesn't spawn with anything. But if you get the market up at the top of the unique spawn around 12 o'clock, that has pallets and stuff that you can use. So that can err on the side of killer if you get the gallows. But that's basically it. Everything else is like, this is a very heavily interconnected map with a lot of filler tiles, tons of general tiles as well. It's very easy to chain tiles on Borgo. It's a very good map. The only thing, like I said at the beginning of this that I alluded to, is like some killers do really well on this map. Like Blight always has stuff to bump into. The loops are typically pretty low, which favors range killers like Huntress, Deathslinger. But other than that, yeah, this map sucks. This one, after its recent, I feel like I would put this in definitely Survivor sided before its rework. But new Gas Heaven is a little bit nicer. Gas Heaven used to be pretty arduous before it got reworked because of the giant car walls that's essentially separated the map into sections. And if you weren't a high mobility killer, even if you were a high mobility killer, it was very hard to pressure the areas behind the long car walls. Now the car walls have been broken up. So it's easier for the killer to get place to place to pressure these, pressure gens, pressure survivors. But it's still, Gas 7 still retains a lot of its annoyingness. That main building is still very good. Very good. You have to break a lot of breakable walls to be able to play that. Even then, the pallets in there are fairly good. And now one of the breakable walls in the garage is open, so you can just leave and chain with other tiles now, which is very good for Survivor. Yeah, there's just, once again, like we've said in common with Borgo and a lot of these other maps, is that there's a lot of chainable tiles. You'll get a general tile into a path palette, into there's a completely new tile on this map now, since in what they put in place of the car walls being taken down is now the car walls can spawn with a pallet that, you know, you have to throw and then they have to kick it, which is, you know, is good for Survivor. Not as good as just blocking off side of the map, but that's still pretty good. That's still a good resource. The only thing I kind of noticed that's weak about this map in terms of Survivor is, like, sometimes, or a lot of the time, you'll get like Pride Rock just like dead in the middle. And obviously, if you don't have balance, Pride Rock's just kind of a nothing tile. It doesn't help you. But the rest of the map is very chainable, very good, even with the car walls gone. So, all right, we're going into the definitely Survivor side of now. First off, we're going to start off with the Disturbed Ward. So we were talking about Groaning Storehouse up here. We're talking about the cubby maps, and I told you to keep that in your head. Keep that in your head. There's another one of those cubby maps. It's designed almost the exact same way as Groaning Storehouse, where there's a huge center where most of the gameplay takes place, but also there's little cubbies on the side that are dead-end zones that are bad for the killer to go pressure because it cuts out all your ambient pressure. If you go back in there, obviously, just like with Groaning Storehouse, those are accompanied by multiple tiles that are very, very good for wasting your time. Unlike Groaning Storehouse, sometimes you only get one tile in one of those cubbies because a water tower will spawn in there, but you always get two tiles in Disturbed Ward back in those cubbies. And that's not even beginning to talk about how freaking overpowered this main building is. And this main building has always been an issue. It's never not been. They reworked the map and it still ended up being super strong. Tons and tons of safe pallets, tons and tons of safe vaults you have to circumvent by either kicking a breakable wall or going a long way around. This main building is problematic. It is very, very strong, and there's nothing you can really do to circumvent the main building besides just kicking everything out of the way, which is a big time investment. And time in DBD is gen time, match time, gen time. You hear me say that a lot. And that's not even talking about just like all the filler pallets that spawn on this map, all the general tiles that spawn on this map. The really only big like bad dead zone is by the garden hedge over on the right side of the map. That's kind of, even that spawns a pallet there sometimes. Like even that weaker side of the map, like you still get at least one or two pallets over there. Like there's kind of just like not a weak area on this map, really. There's less strong areas, but there's not really weak areas. So it's just kind of like a dreadful map to play on for killer. There's really nobody I really want to be going here on. And just like I talked about in the Father Campbells map we were talking about, is the Disturbed Ward. It spawns something into Shack, which, you know, always makes Shack way stronger if something spawns into it. So generally a very dreadful map in every way. Next, thankfully, it's being reworked. This is the only thing that I looked at in terms of their map plans. I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. It's Fractured Cowshed. I don't know why they didn't rework Fractured Cowshed when they first reworked the Coldwind maps, but Fractured Cowshed has been infamously always one of the most survivor-sided maps in the game because of the fact that they have kind of a similar thing to talking about Rotten Fields and stuff like that, where there's always tiles all the way around the edge of the map. And most of these are, the thing that makes it a little bit more special on Fractured is that they're mostly safe. Like, you will always have resources all the way around the map on, like, Rotten Fields, but, like, you know, it may not be the best, you know, resources in the world. Fractured Cowshed almost always uniquely spawns, like, really, really good and really, really safe pallets. I call them the cart tiles. The cart tiles, where it's just like a parked cart, and it's, like, safe on both sides. They're essentially mini LWT walls. Or not LWT walls. They're basically mini long wall, short walls, except they're everywhere. There's like two parked outside main building, and main building you already have to kick breakable walls to even circumvent the windows in the main building itself. And even if you do that, they just vault out and start going to the little mini long wall, short walls outside of the main building, which, you know, gives them a lot of time wasters because those are pallets you basically have to kick. And even if they escape, they go around the edge of the map, and then they have a general tile into another safe. But like, it's just, there is essentially safe tiles the entire length of the map. The only places that kind of get dead zone-y are like the middle of the map, but the middle map usually either spawns tractor or cow tree anyway. So even that's not really a dead zone, realistically. Even if you get the tractor, that's still something, right? Like this map really doesn't have a dead zone, like at all, period. So it's just kind of like, this map is just a mess in the sense that it's just one big giant circle of safe pallets and safe resources. And there's really not like, unless you get a really, really bad spawn of just like, oh, it's just a bunch of L-wall T-walls. Well, even that's what I'm saying is like, even if you get a bunch of L-wall T-walls for your general tiles, you still have the cart tiles, which are always good. Like, and those don't change much with RNG. So like, even if you get a bad RNG fractured, you still have the cart tiles, which are very, very good. So yeah, there's not really a way to get a bad fractured cowshed. All right, so we're gonna talk about Mother's Dwelling, which, you know, they recently reworked this map, and it's still, they didn't adjust the size. This is the one of the biggest maps in the game. I believe it's outright the biggest map in the game since they split RPD, but I'd have to check that. But Mother's Dwelling is nearly impossible to defend the gens on this map just because it's too huge, it's too giant, and it comes with all the strong stuff that I was talking about with the Temple of Purgation, with like the log tiles that are even better. They're essentially like the cart tiles from Fractured Cowshed, where they're kind of mini long wall, short walls. So they're super hard to circumvent, if at all. And those are all over the place. This map can spawn little baby dead zones when it comes to like the, I don't know how to describe it. There's a tile that spawns that really isn't a tile. It's just like a bunch of rocks. It's like a little like rocks with skulls, and that's literally a nothing zone. Main building is really good, especially if you have balanced or lithe. There is a god window that spawns in this main building that is not circumventable at all. I mean, if you like bamboozle it, there's usually at least a pallet or two around the main building itself that you can get to, even if you bamboozle off that window. It's just, there's a vault upstairs that, you know, you can circumvent it if you call out the vault, but like if you don't, it's pretty safe for the most part too. Like, main building's really good. One of the biggest maps in the game, if not outright the biggest map in the game, with really good tiles. Like this, it's just ick. This map's just, it's ginormous, and it has good tiles, and it has a good main building. Not really complicated in any way. All right, Garden of Joy. Garden of Joy is probably the biggest boogeyman to come out of DBD in like the last year or so, because Garden of Joy has an infamous god window that they tried to take away from old Haddonfield, which is a god window where you literally have to vault after them, and there's nothing you can do about it. And that's in that main building, which is disgusting. Even if you do follow them out and you do catch up to them, there is a god pallet on the porch right next to that god vault, which is an easy out, even if you do get caught up to. So that's an immense time waster. Even then, even if you don't want to go use that god pallet, there's always a jungle gym spawn directly ahead of that god vault. So you have multiple options out of a god vault, which is just ridiculous because those are all static. That's never RNG. That's always there. And speaking of things that are never static, Shack always spawns with the best orientation because it always spawns in that back corner facing outward. And that back line of the map all the way across the bottom is Shack, filler pallet, into jungle gym, into the parking lot. It's like, it's a whole line. The whole line of stuff. And that whole line goes and continues back up the left side of the map, going into another jungle gym, into another filler tile, into the garden, like the greenhouse, which always usually spawns a pallet, or the pagoda, which has a vault. Like, once again, you're seeing this again, kind of this Rotten Fields effect, where like you can go all the way around in an entire part of the map and never run out of resources. And even if you go down the center, in the middle of the street, there's always pallets, kind of like on Badham, which we haven't got to yet, where there's just a bunch of pallets in the street that you can use, filler pallets to get to places. There's a truck pallet that always spawns out front of the main building. Like, you will never ever run anywhere in this map and be in a dead zone besides perhaps the right side, because you have that, like, whatever that is, that's like a subway train or something that's like stuck into the ground straight up, and that has a window vault that's pretty weak, but that's still not nothing. That's still something. So you're never gonna have no resources on Carn of Joy. Everywhere you are safe, or more safe than nothing. So yeah, it's disgusting. And finally, capping off this big video, Badham. You have 4 buildings. You have Shack, you have the preschool, you have the 2-story house, and you have Old House of Pain. Not talking about Haddonfield House of Pain that has no window vaults. This one still has the window vaults. You do have breakable walls here, but they don't really help you too much. They just make your life a little less suck. Preschool, always guaranteed pallet spawns up top, up bottom. A very, very huge time waster with a very good vault out front. 2 not safe, but relatively safe car loops on both sides of the preschool itself. Always a bunch of filler pallets everywhere. Badham 2 in particular can spawn up to like 4 path tiles into Shack, which is just absolutely disgusting. 4 path tiles into 4 path tiles into Shack. So disgusting. The 2-story house, you got to break the brick walls downstairs to circumvent the windows, or else that's nightmare. There's a safe pallet upstairs that you have to kick to get rid of it, or to circumvent it. Yeah, this Old House of Pain always been one of the strongest tiles in the game, even when they added breakable walls to it. That's still there. What else is there to say about Badham? Badham's just disgusting. Badham also, like I said, mentioned in Garden of Joy, is down the streets of Badham, like the actual streets that are on the map. There's always a bunch of filler tiles around the cars or the ambulances that you could use. This map's just stupid. This map's just dumb. So this stuff would have been bad normally, and then the map has 4 main buildings. Well, 3 main buildings in Shack. Some maps, like Rotten Fields, don't even get one. Don't even get 1 main building. They just get a Shack. Badham has 3 main buildings. What were they thinking? Lastly, I want to talk about, because I don't have an image for it, I'm just going to use Hawkins as a filler. I want to talk about the Goop map. The Goop map is disgusting. The new map that's coming with In's Transmission. It's a very terrible map, and I see it being bad for both sides. Because in terms of killer traversal and use of killer powers, it's so cluttered and so much stuff is everywhere that I don't see any killer having fun on this map at all. But survivors at the same time, which again, ease of traversal is really important in ASIMs, and traversing this map is very hard to do because there's so much crap everywhere. The main building is pretty good. It has 3 floors. And there's a lot of new pallet spawns and new tiles that I can see survivors getting very used to. It might err on mostly survivor-sided, but I think just an initial glance, just with how messily the map is designed, it's probably going to be bad for both sides. Both sides are going to hate it. A la, like, you know, Pale Rose or like Lery's. So yeah, that is my map tier list. Like I said, I tried to make it somewhat objective, but a lot of it is a lot of subjective feeling as well. Let me know if there's any big gripes, many big disagreements that you have with certain placements on this tier list. I'm sure people will drag me in the comments for some of these, but that's kind of like the fun of it. It's like, hey, let's see how different our opinions are. Well, that's gonna be it for today's video, friends. Thank you so much for listening to me for such an egregiously long amount of time. I appreciate you all for spending time with me, but I do upload daily, so I will see you tomorrow. But if I don't, I'll see you when I see you. Bye.